Okay, so second round of the first day, I'm paired against the German player Arndt Kretschmar, rated 1917, and we're both on 0 out of 1, playing on the very last boards in this category, but no worries. Anyways, I have the white pieces, and I definitely know what my first move is going to be, though I don't know what my opponent plays. So yeah, I entered the game. First off, I play 1e4. My opponent plays c5, which I'm very happy to welcome. And then knight f3, which is the only move I've ever played. Pawn to d6. And in tournament chess, in classical chess, I've only played the move pawn to d4 so far. But I've recently been doing some work in the move bishop e5 check, which I ended up playing in this game, the so-called Moscow variation. And I've made like 3 videos, actually 4 videos, covering the Moscow variation, all of black's options. And overall, black is fine after either bishop d7 or knight d7. But yeah, they need to know some stuff. And after bishop d7, I play bishop takes d7, and black is faced with a crossroads here of either taking back with the knight or taking back with the queen. Now, the problem with taking with the knight is that the knight is kind of less active on d7. It doesn't really do much here. So on c6 would be much more useful. For example, castles, knight gf6, and here either playing rook e1, followed by, let's say, e6 and c4 would be quite decent for white. I also like the move queen e2 to prepare rook d1 and d4. Let's say e6, c4 now, let's say maybe bishop e7, rook d1, castles, and then pawn to d4. And I do like this kind of position with getting this Marxi bind with the rook on d1 being quite nice. And even later like b3, bishop e2, and overall just preventing black's advances, because this setup of the Marxi bind with the pawn on c4 and e4 is mainly targeted against stopping pawn to d5 and also pawn to b5. So if white is able to do that, then they're going to be doing quite well. So yeah, it might be just a slight advantage. And the point is that if I play rook e1, let's say, and they play e6, if I want to expand in the center with c3 and d4, it doesn't really work out too well, which is why pawn to c4 is critical. So if I play c3, they just develop bishop e7, and if I play d4, takes, black has a thematic move to play to challenge the center with d5. And let's say e5, they stick a knight on e4, and at some point, even though I play, let's say, knight bd2, they can take, even though white has a nice center, at some point f6 is going to come, and they're going to get enough counterplay against white's center. So black's doing fine in that position. Instead, queen takes d7 was played, which is more natural to bring the knight out to c6. And in this position, it's important for me to play c4 immediately, because if I castle, then I'm a bit too slow. They play knight c6, I play c4, they play knight f6 attacking e4. So knight c3 is like what I want to play in general. So they play g6, and after I play d4, takes, and bishop g7. The problem is that now the bishop kind of puts pressure on this, potential pressure on this knight. So there's a threat of maybe knight takes e4 here, unleashing a discovered attack on the knight. And so I'm going to have to play a move like knight d2, which clearly cannot be the right approach. And the problem is that if I play bishop e3, preparing f3 next, black is just in time to play the move knight g4 and win the dark bishop. So white is struggling here. So going back here, this is why it's important in this position to play pawn to c4 without castling so early. After knight c6, knight c3, g6, which, okay, the bishop just belongs on the long diagonal to control the d4 square. So now I play d4, c takes d4, knight d4, bishop g7, bishop e3, knight f6, and I'm just in time to play the move pawn to f3, preventing knight g4. And now white has the ideal Marxi bind structure with the pawn on c4 and e4. And after castles, black essentially, I believe, that only has one way to equalize comfortably, which is through some forcing lines. If you want to test out your Moscow theory or try to figure it out yourself, then please feel free to do so. So yeah, the only kind of comfortable way to equalize is actually either playing a6 first, or playing rook fc8. And this can most likely transpose. The point is, after a6, black is threatening bishop takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop d4, and then playing b5. For example, if I play the natural queen d2, then after takes, black breaks with b5 and is able to, for example, open up the a file here for the rook, which is why, in general, the rook on f8 belongs on c8 instead of the a rook, because the rook is now useful on the a file. So that's kind of dangerous. And so seeing the threat of b5, if I play a move like a4, then black is quick enough to get e6 and d5. So essentially, the Moscow, like it depends on the fact if black is able to push either the pawn to b5 or d5. And if they're not able to play pawn to b5, as I've restricted it with my pawns on a4 and c4, then they're gonna have to break with d5. And if they're able to do so, then they're gonna be fine. For example, here I cannot play queen d2 on account of knight a5, hitting both c4 and the b3 square, possibly. E5 is a threat right now. So if I play a move like rook c1, then they can even play knight e5, attacking c4, b3, and then now break with d5 in the center. And they're going to be fine here. So yeah, there are just some technical problems here, which is why queen d3 is the main move. So even after queen d3, they can still play rook fc8 or knight e5 immediately, attacking both the c4 pawn and the queen. After the queen comes to e2, rook a to c8 is important. And if I defend the pawn with b3, then they're going to break in the center with d5. And this is, okay, but actually this one, I believe, leads to slight advantage for white, though it should still be equal. In this kind of position, takes. Yeah, this is still theory, but I believe that white has a slight edge because of these possible weaknesses. So instead, I think the critical line was shown by MVL against Caruana. Yeah, this is the model game that happened after 95. Actually, no, rook fc8 first, important. After b3, now b5, striking on the queen side, which looks impossible. But the point is that after cb5 and knight e5, attacking the queen and the knight, white has to go queen d2. Black breaks in the center with d5. And as a result of this, black is doing very much fine. For example, I went into this variation in my video talking about the Moscow, but I didn't go into too much detail. I just mentioned this Caruana MVL game as a note. But for example, knight takes d5, takes, ab5, rook a d1, queen takes d5. So it seems like black has restored material equality here. But after the move queen e2, attacking the b5 pawn twice, and also threatening some knight f5 jumps maybe, black can play knight c6 here and sacrifice the b5 pawn. Now the point is after takes, black can play this annoying move queen e6, which pins the bishop, and black is able to generate enough counterplay with the queen on e6 specifically. For example, rook f1, knight b4, attacking e2, so rook d2 is kind of forced, and this kind of construction is not great for white. Black can even play a move like h5 here and get equality because white is unable to make progress. For example, they can't move the pawn to a4. And so, in conclusion, this line is just equal, though both white and black needs to know some stuff, obviously. So yeah, this is kind of the line that can equalize, and if you're playing this from the black side, it's very important to know this. But instead, my opponent plays rook fc8, which is fine. I play now pawn to b3, defending c4 prophylactically, and now a6. Yeah, and in this position, if I play queen d3, again, this idea of b5 comes up, and yeah, black is managing to equalize. But yeah, it's like, it's very not like it's kind of counterintuitive, I bet, to like go for this, to go for this b5 and d5, because it seems like it shouldn't work, but it actually does. And against a6 here, I was kind of out of book here, honestly. And I decided that because I know that this queen d3, b5 stuff kind of works for black, I'm gonna play pawn to a4. And I do weaken some of the dark squares here, especially the b4 square and a5 square, but I do prevent the pawn to b5 break. And I analyzed that in this position during the game, that both the moves e6 give white a slight edge after, let's say, pawn to a5 here. And let's say if they play queen c7, I've analyzed d5, but I can, for example, play knight takes e6 after bc6, knight e4 here. This is very annoying, I believe. So yeah, instead, if they play queen c7, then I can play knight c6. So now they're attacking e5, so I played knight takes e6, bc6, and again knight e4 with knight b6 coming. And black has managed to equalize here after rook b8 and knight b6. But they're gonna have to go for this after rook d8, queen d2, knight d7, rook d1. It seems like I kind of have like nice pressure over the d6 pawn, and I have a knight firmly stuck on b6. But they're able to play knight takes b6, bishop b6, and sacrifice this exchange which is not surprising that this gives equality. But let's say I'm attacking a6, so yeah, and also the rook, so rook a8, rook d6, queen takes c4. I can give a check on d8, trade off the rooks, and force bishop f8 back, and then play rook d1, possibly threatening, to enter with the rook. So now queen b5, and now I can give some loop to my king with h4. And yeah, essentially black has enough compensation here, but black is kind of pushing a bit because they have some pressure with maybe the rook coming eventually to the 7th rank if allowed. So yeah, I'd be like, it's obviously like not every opening can, there are no openings that can give like an objective advantage. So seeing that this kind of poses some practical problems for black should be a pretty good approach in general. Like nowadays, I'm not too fussed that some lines give equality if black plays correctly, because that's the nature of chess. Anyways, I've analyzed both e6 and queen d8, and also, yeah, so those options, I believe, give white a slight edge, or like, some initiative, some slight initiative. And if they play queen d8, for example, which is the typical idea, to try to go to a5, maybe b4, and also bring the knight to d7 to c5, I can play queen d2, let's say queen a5, and rook fd1, let's say they play knight d7, and this move rook, okay, first off, they're attacking the knight on d4, and it's important to know that in general, black is trying to exchange pieces because they're kind of cramped here. So what white wants to do is avoid the exchange of pieces so that they're able to use their pieces and the extra space to their advantage. So they should probably play a move like knight d2, maybe knight c5, and then I can play rook b1, defending the b pawn. And I think white has a tiny edge here because just of the, due to the sole fact of the extra space. And it's kind of like a question of what should black do next, since white can maybe even consider maybe playing knight g3, f4, f5, maybe h4, h5 is an idea. And white is easier play here. Maybe bringing the knight to f4 to d5 is also possible. So yeah, I've analyzed that basically after pawn to a4. I'm quite confident that my plans will work out. And my opponent plays the move knight b4, which is a move I looked at for a brief second, but I realized that, okay, the move does nothing, essentially, because it's either the knight on b4 prepares the break pawn to d5, or it does nothing at all. So now I realize that I'm definitely slightly better in this position at least. So I continue with normal play, queen d2, and now black plays the move queen d8, which I kind of expected on the previous move, to bring this knight d7 to c5 idea. But with the knight on b4, it's like, what is the knight doing? And now I'm forced to make a decision. What should I do next? What I want to do is like bring the rook f to d1, but I realized that's, okay, which rook should I bring to d1? I realized that maybe my rook on b1 actually is more useful on b1 so that it can defend the b3 pawn in case, black brings the knight to c5. So this is kind of the next move I play is a very prophylactic move, rook a to b1, which looks kind of mysterious, but it has the sole purpose that if ever black plays knight d7 to c5, my b3 pawn is covered sufficiently. So I thought that during the game that this was just like, this is probably not the best move, but it actually is, possibly like the top 2 moves. And I like this move a lot. Essentially, my ideal setup is bringing the f rook to d1 and bringing the a rook to b1. So I play rook a b1 now. And for example, if I played rook a d1, which I calculated for a bit, rook a d1, then they can play knight d7. Let's say I try to start my kingside initiative with f4, then they play knight c5, and they are threatening bishop takes d4. So I'm eventually forced to play rook b1 anyways. So seeing this, having calculated this, I realized that rook a b1 immediately is possibly better. And now knight d7. And in this position, what I should have gone for is that I should have just played f4 immediately. Now, I'm not sure why I didn't do it. I think that the move that I looked at in the game, I analyzed for like a couple minutes, and I thought it was quite nice. But I played the move knight d5 here, which doesn't have a clear purpose. The problem is that if white, the ideal setup is that if black takes on d5, I play e takes d5, and the pawn on e7 just becomes a backward pawn. For example, I can bring the f rook to e1, play bishop g5, and eventually put some pressure on e7. And this would be like a perfect structure, essentially. But after knight d5, they're not forced to take on d5. So after knight c6, retreating, I realized that, oh, like, what am I doing? They're actually threatening to trade pieces here. So that's not what I want to do. And so I bring the knight to e2 back, which is very thematic, just not allowing the exchange of pieces. And now rook a b8. And now this is the problem, that I'm actually facing the threat of b5 right now, which is why I end up playing the move knight d to c3, just to prevent b5. I think, yeah, my entire approach is just to play positionally, play very slow, but essentially limit black's counterplay, limit the pawn break to b5. So if I play a move like bishop g5, I thought that it would get kind of out of control after pawn to b5. Let's say it takes, and maybe I can play rook fc1 here and put some decent pressure here. But just the entire idea of playing the Moscow, for me at least, is to prevent black's breaks with both b5 and d5. So having achieved this structure, I'm not entirely satisfied, let's say, even though it's like quite a good line. Instead I play knight dc3, which is just kind of admitting my mistake of bringing the knight to d5. But I felt like even if I wasted like 2 tempi, black has also wasted 2 tempi with knight c6 to b4, and then bring the knight back to c6. So yeah, I should be slightly better. I evaluated this. And now black plays knight e5, which I thought wasn't great because the knight is very vulnerable in e5 to f4 eventually. Now I want to push f4, but it runs into knight g4. So I played the prophylactic move h3 to prevent knight g4. And possibly best is just to retreat with the knight back to d7. But now I start the initiative with f4, and it's like I'm getting definitely like a sizable advantage here. So instead my opponent plays knight e5, which is off the mark. So I need to evaluate first off if knight takes b3 or knight takes e4 is a threat. But I realized that, okay, like after f4, knight takes b3 doesn't really work. Like rook b3, knight c4, I'm playing queen d3, and I'm simply up a piece. Like there's nothing to be said here. So I realized that, okay, I calculated, I made sure that f4 works, and so now I play f4. And yeah, actually, the computer suggests a very nice solution, which is to play the move bishop a7 first, harassing the rook. After rook a8, making the rook a bit less active, I can play bishop f2 here, or even like I think bishop f2, and then go for f4 later. Yeah, but I didn't see this during the game. I considered the idea of bishop a7, but I thought that I'm gonna waste 2 tempi bringing the bishop back to e3 eventually. But yeah, I continue with f4, very logical. Now my opponent plays knight d7, and now I play f5. So I think in this position, bishop a7 is even stronger because I can go for this idea of bringing the bishop to d4. And now this gives me a sizable advantage because if they take on d4 after knight takes d4, I have basically free advantage here. If they ever play e5, I can maybe just play like knight f3 or knight d2, bring the knight to d5, and open up the f file eventually. So yeah, I didn't see this idea of bishop a7, so I end up going for f5, which is more logical. I do give up the e5 square, but I realized that after knight e5, I can play knight d5. And I saw that there are some threats here, first off of bishop b6, and also maybe the move pawn to f6 to kind of break up the pawn structure. So after knight d5, actually, yeah, also another move I consider after f5 is obviously just bring the knight back to c6. But I concluded after knight d5 and pawn to b5, I can take on b5, rook b5, and then play b4. And essentially, I get a similar position that I showed before, but I have the moves f4, f5 included, meaning that I do create some dynamic potential here to create an attack. Let's say rook c to b8, rook f to c1, hitting the knight, knight d to e5, king h1, just prophylaxis, rook 5 to b7, and then bishop g5. And white has some nice pressure here, having included f4, f5, I believe. But still, like knight d5 is not necessary. I can still just continue the pressure, maybe with a move like knight f4 to d5, or even like bishop g5 right now. So yeah, either way, knight e5, and yeah, I mean, in this position, I already felt that I had a good position. They played knight e5, and then I played the move knight d5. So another possible way to play is go for bishop h6, but after bishop h8, go for knight d5, and after knight c6, play bishop g5. But I didn't really see this. I didn't consider this as like an amazing option. I didn't really see the threat here, but maybe f6 is actually a serious threat. So I should have looked into that further. But instead, knight d5 is fine. And I do need to evaluate what happens after b5. But I figured that after either f6 or... Actually, no, I have knight takes to e7 here. Yeah, which actually just wins a pawn. Or maybe I take on b5 first. cb5, let's say. ab5, knight e7 takes, and I am winning a pawn at the end of the day. Black should have enough compensation, I should say, but you know, it's quite nice to be up a pawn anyways. So knight ac6 was chosen, and now what I could have done is actually play the move knight b6, which I missed. So I saw this move, and I thought after rook c7, I thought I'm not really doing anything with the knight on b6. But actually after knight f4, I'm simply winning an exchange with knight d5. So let's say knight d7, knight d5, and I'm simply winning an exchange here. So yeah, I kind of missed that, but I go for a good option nonetheless. I play the move pawn to f6, which is my entire idea of playing knight d5, and you know, f4, f5. And after ef6, I play the move bishop e6. Now, I thought that after I played the move knight b6, which is objectively stronger, they can play rook c7. Okay, maybe I can play rook b to d1, rook e7, and if I ever take on d6, I'm kind of not happy with having exchanged the queens. So if I play a move like knight d5, rook e6, knight ef4, let's say rook e8, and I can play bishop b6 here, but this is kind of a long line that I didn't really look into. Knight c7, rook f8, a5. Okay, computer recommends king h8 and a knight f d5. And if I saw this position, I would definitely say that white is much better. But I didn't, you know, see all of these ideas in combination, you know. Bringing knight to c7, bring the other knight to d5, pawn to a5. This position is just like so much better. Like, it's so dominating. Black has no counterplay here. That would have been a very picturesque position, but instead I go for the more natural bishop e6. And I was expecting queen f8, which, because after they play queen e8, I play bishop c7, and I kind of threatened to win the d6 pawn, which is a very nice pawn to win. And also I'm misplacing the rook if they move the rook to e8. So I was expecting queen f8 here. And maybe like a move like bishop c7 still, rook a8, knight e to c3 here, knight d7. I can maybe just play some useful moves, king h1, knight c5, bishop e6, knight d7, pawn to a5 here, rook ab8. Let's just put some moves on the board. Knight c5, rook b to d1, and overall just white has a very nice and dominating position. So yeah, I was like, after I looked at this position, and I thought queen f8 was very good for white either way, and queen e8 is even worse because as I played in the game, I played bishop c7, and I'm actually, you know, the d6 pawn is actually holding everything in black's position together. If I win the d6 pawn, it's also important to note that the f6 pawn is also weak, so I'm potentially going to be up a pawn in the resulting middle game. And after rook c7, which was played in the game, which I thought that, okay, like, this must be good for me. Knight takes c7, queen d7. Better is queen d8, actually, because they want to defend the f6 pawn. Let's say knight d5 and knight d7, with at least, you know, they have a pawn for the exchange, which is not enough, but it's better than what happened in the game. Because in the game, they played queen d7, which allowed knight d5, and I'm hitting f6 now. And I think if they play queen d8, okay, I mean, like, I've successfully, you know, they've just like wasted like so many moves with the queen here. It can't be good. And so they break here with b5. And in this position, I thought that, okay, like, I'm not happy to allow b5, but I've already gotten with an exchange up, so like, I should be happy with this exchange. So I thought, what should I do? And I figured that the simplest option was just to take on b5. I exchange everything on b5, and in this position, I make it an accuracy. So here I was thinking that, you know, there's so many moves that black could play, so why not just take on f6? I briefly considered knight e to c3 after rook b8, but I didn't think that there was a difference with the knight on e2 and c3, but there's actually a big difference. The point is, after I take, for example, on f6, d6 is weak, first off. d5 square is open for the other knight. So yeah, this is just like a very nice improvement to bring the knight to c3 first before taking on f6. Because what happens in the game after you take on f6 is after takes, they play queen b7, and they're actually putting pressure on b3, which is quite annoying. And here, I could have played queen e3, but I was worried maybe of like knight c4 stuff and hitting the knight, you know, queen c3. Should still be good, but I thought that this is a bit more complicated than it had to be. Instead I played queen takes d6, which I realized after rook takes b3, I was like getting a bit worried because if I take on b3, there essentially is only like one move that gives a big advantage for white, which is the move queen d5. And I didn't really, after I saw this position and I thought the queen is maybe coming to b1, hitting e4, my king is a bit weak here, I thought that I shouldn't go into this. But essentially after queen d5, and I'm defending e4 also, I'm attacking the knight. So let's say queen b2, I play knight g3, and I have everything under control. Yeah, so like I have pressure on f7, I have pressure on c6. Overall, just a very good position. But I thought that, okay, I don't want to allow the queen to come in, so I should play a move like rook c1 here. And if they play rook b1, which I calculated for a bit, I thought that I could maybe get away with a move like king h2. And even if they take here, maybe this is annoying actually, queen here, but maybe queen c5. Yeah, but they end up taking on e4. Becomes a bit unclear. So yeah, I remember after rook b1, I thought that maybe I had to go with maybe a move like queen d1 or something like that, which I'm not happy about. But yeah, I figured that if I get to this position, I'm gonna figure it out eventually. So yeah, either way, they play rook d3, hitting my queen. So my queen has only one good square, which is queen c5. And then they play a blunder, knight d7, which I wasn't sure like what the point is. They should have just played rook d2, tried to bring the other rook in, but I play knight f4 and I'm quite happy. I bring the knight to d5, I'm hitting both knights actually, and my g2 pawn is under control. So this is fine. Instead they play knight d7, which blunders the knight on c6, but their idea was to give king a7 check, king h2, and then take on f6. But they've given up even more material, like I'm just now up a piece. So they play queen b8 check, I now play king h1, getting the king out of any checks, rook e3, and in this position, what I should have done is actually play knight c3, and then bring the knight to d5. And I didn't realize the strength of this, because I saw that maybe after queen b2, rook d1 is actually just decisive. So I didn't see this idea. Instead, I played rook d1 immediately, which forced resignation. Because I took like some time here before playing rook d1, because I thought that maybe knight c3 was even an improvement, and it is. But I didn't see this idea of rook d1 in this line. For example, queen b2 and rook d1 now. Yeah, and for example, they can play queen c8 here, but now I can play rook d1. And now, for example, after rook c3, I can play check. And if they take here, then they can simply just lose after queen d4, picking up the rook. So yeah, I missed, I found the move rook d1 in this position, which forced resignation. But I didn't realize that I could have played knight c3 and for queen b2 go for rook d1, which is even stronger. And so yeah, after rook d1, my opponent resigned. But I evaluated basically that this position is winning. I'm gonna have to, of course, I'm clearly winning here, but I'm gonna have to work for this. It might take another 50, 60 moves, to convert this. But I essentially, with this e-pawn still on the board, I can maybe play a move like queen d5, and then bring the pawn to e5, and try to create some weaknesses here, maybe h4, h5 as well. And in general, I should just win this position after some work. So I wasn't really too worried about that, about this being a fortress. If this e-pawn was not on the board, then it would be close to it, but yeah, maybe with 2 pawns less, this might be a fortress, but not this position. So a very smooth game for the Moscow. I'm very happy, having analyzed this at home without by myself. I've essentially managed to use my analysis for a positive tournament result. So very happy about that. And yeah, I think that there are a couple improvements I could have made in this game. For example, I think I was rushing here a bit with knight d5. That was unnecessary. The knight doesn't do anything on d5. I should have just been patient and maybe gone for the immediate f4, since that was my idea to begin with. And additionally, I believe in this position after f6 takes, I didn't accurately calculate knight b6. Or also, like in this position, I think I didn't calculate knight b6, which immediately won the exchange. So yeah, I think there are a couple improvements to be made. Also in the endgame, in the simplified position, I was like, I should have considered here knight e to c3, useful tempo move, and then taking on f6 next. Instead, I play, the very lazy knight takes f6. So anyways, a smooth game nonetheless. I'm on 1 out of 2. And that's all for the first day. So yeah, second day, gonna be a fresh start. I'm gonna have the black pieces. Definitely gonna have like 3 blacks and 2 whites. But either way, yeah, very happy with this game. Hope you enjoyed it, learned a thing or two. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.